I really don't want to sound arrogant and say, I told you so, but at the end of July, I told you to sell in August. It's even written on the thumbnail, and I got hate for it. I got some really stupid comments about it, but just take a look. Exactly in the middle of August, just like I said, we saw the local top. I even talked in the video about how you should be careful around the 7th or 9th of August because of the customs issue, that it might be the local top then, but actually the 4th of August turned out to be pretty accurate, just as I predicted. I simply said sell in August because September would probably be corrective, and I made it very clear in the video, guys, this is not going to be a new bear market. It's just a completely normal correction, which is part of the process. Just a grinding phase, which we've already seen several times in this cycle. Every time we go through these phases again, and yes, for the past few weeks, we've been stuck in one again. I predicted it 1.5 months ago. Feel free to leave a like and a comment for the fact that I don't mince words here and tell it exactly as I see it, how I act myself, how I view things myself, no matter whether it's well received or not. Nevertheless, let's talk about the current Bitcoin chart, and here it simply looks like we've seen the top, formed a low, and reached a lower high. Accordingly, there are now two zones that are very interesting. We've actually been in a downtrend here for the past few weeks. Now it all depends on what happens next. Will we break out to the upside or the downside? For new order entries, this level is needed. If we sustainably rise above $118,000, we will definitely set new all-time highs because we've had a low here, a high, and a low. But we haven't fully defined the low yet. However, we'll only be back in an uptrend once we break through this last high. So if we break through the $118,000 mark here, then everything is bullish again. As long as that doesn't happen, we're more likely in a downtrend. And this zone here is also extremely interesting, whether we'll see support again at just under $117,000 and then continue to rise, because in the past this was a good support zone. It would be interesting to see if that's the case again now. If we just test this level once and then rise again, that would be a double bottom, and from there we could continue to climb. But right now it's a bit hard to assess. I'm being honest and transparent about that, of course. There are always these or those scenarios in trading, but I only trade based on confirmation, which is why I've marked these two zones for you here. But what you have to say is that most people are rather bearish. Most people tend to think that we will go significantly lower. The fear and greed index is back in the fear zone, and 85% of crypto Twitter is bearish. So most people are leaning towards us continuing to fall. And these are both points that actually make me feel positive again, that maybe we will start to rise. We need the fear. We need people to be worried. Only then will the market really turn around nicely. To put it simply, whenever Bitcoin rises sharply, the funding rates go up, trades increase, and people are maximally long. And that's when the market makers try to counteract. The market makers try to neutralize this and deliberately dampen the market, creating fear and weakness so that the funding rate is pushed back down. The funding rate is the fee that a trade costs, because it's always bad when everyone is long or everyone is short at the same time. Market makers always try to balance this out a bit, or rather, when too many people go long, it becomes much easier for the market makers to trigger a liquidation and for us to see the trend reversal. Because right now we can see that a lot of capital gets liquidated when we move higher. That means people are more on the short side, and accordingly, it's good for the market makers if we go up, because that liquidates a lot of shorts. On the other hand, we only have half as many longs that make a difference here. That's the update on the trading topic so far. And now we're going to tackle a very exciting topic. When will we reach the Bitcoin top? So let's take a look at that. Every time after the halving, it took about 500 to 550 days before we saw the Bitcoin top. And currently, that would mean that we should see the Bitcoin top this month or next month. But somehow at the moment, it doesn't really look like that's going to happen, or rather it seems more likely that it's going to take a bit longer. Just as you have to admit, Bitcoin dominance has only been falling for about 2.5 months. In the past, we sometimes saw corrections in Bitcoin dominance that lasted 9 or even 12 months. We simply haven't seen that yet this time. Accordingly, there are many indications suggesting that this whole thing will be drawn out a bit longer and that we'll probably reach the cycle top in the first or second quarter of 2026. In the past, Bitcoin strictly followed the 4-year cycle, and everyone knows that now. Everyone is familiar with this 4-year theory by now. The thing is, now we have Wall Street involved and the whole sentiment has changed a bit. Now, Bitcoin generally follows the macro economy, the real economy, because of the institutions, since institutions tend to act according to the economy as well. And in the real economy, we also have cycles. Periods when you make money, when we see an expansion of money supply, and periods when you don't really make money, when we don't see an expansion of money supply, and when the economy is generally weaker. Until 2026, it's possible to make money in the real world, in the real economy. Of course, these are always just rough guidelines, you have to be clear about that. But what we have to say now is that the US has increased its average debt maturity from 4 years to 5 years. Accordingly, the real economy is currently running more on a 5-year cycle than on a 4-year cycle. And of course, that also changes quite a bit for Bitcoin. And it's quite interesting to take a look at the ISM in this context. The ISM is the US Business Activity Index. This index has reflected the US economy quite accurately, showing whether it is currently doing well or poorly. And here too, we were in a 4-year cycle. But currently, that has also shifted, and we are now in a 5.4-year cycle. Accordingly, if we were to continue following this pattern, we would reach our top in the second quarter of 2026, because according to the ISM, that's roughly when we should see the peak of the real economy. Here's another illustration of just how closely Bitcoin correlates with the ISM. Take a look at this. It's incredible. The last 3 cycles matched up perfectly with the ISM, and this time the ISM clearly indicates that we might not reach our Bitcoin top until early to mid-2026. Does that mean it's definitely going to happen that way? No, not necessarily. But what you definitely have to say is that the real economy and real liquidity, whether through the money supply or the Fed's balance sheet, are becoming increasingly important for Bitcoin. And in the past, it was crucial that we had global liquidity and an expansion of money supply in the US. Right now, we're already seeing good global liquidity. The current chart is a bit outdated, but what we still don't have is the Fed's balance sheet, because they're still pursuing a restrictive monetary policy. But that's going to change in the near future, since we're also starting to see interest rate cuts. This means that the macroeconomy, the real economy, will very likely keep going much longer than just until the end of this year. With this kind of monetary expansion, we could actually see a boom until 2026. And in the past, that was extremely important for Bitcoin, and this time everything is just a bit delayed. I mean, let's just take a look at the gold price. We're at $3,800 per ounce. That clearly means that people are still fleeing to gold because we still have some problems in the real economy. That means we're not yet in the risk zone with regular assets. We're in a phase where people are avoiding risk and are more likely to hold onto their money. However, if we see a correction here, that would clearly be a sign that investors are moving back into risk assets. At the moment, that's not entirely the case yet, because we can also see with silver is also rising sharply, and that only happens because in the real economy, we still don't know 100% how things will develop, and because the real economic cycle is stretching out a bit longer. And I think that's a very interesting theory. These things are definitely worth considering. As I said, check everything for yourself, don't just follow me blindly. But I just presented this theory to you here because, in part, it is of course plausible. From a macro perspective, it's very likely that we won't reach our top at the end of this year, but rather sometime next year or the year after. Macroeconomically, the real economy will probably reach its peak sometime next year. Whether that will also shift the Bitcoin cycle, we don't know yet, but it's interesting to keep something like that in mind. And at this point, friends, I want to thank you, as always, very sincerely. Especially with such wild theories, I need your support. Leave a like and a comment and see you next time. Ciao.